before 9/11. Well, I was born in Brooklyn. I was raised on Long Island. It was me and my mom and my dad and my little brother and our dog, who was a Siberian Husky named Kima. And one of the nice things about living on Long Island, I think, we used to go into Manhattan often, whether it be on field trips through school or whether my parents would take us there. And in the field trips through school, we used to go to museums. We used to go to the Empire State Building. We went to the Statue of Liberty. We got to know New York City through those cultural trips, and it was really wonderful. But I just want to say that one of the things back then about New York City was that it was a much more dangerous place than it is today. There were a lot of gangs. There was a lot of poverty. If you remember, if you've ever seen in the movies the subways with all the graffiti, there were always cops running around. You had to be careful that you didn't get mugged. So it was a very, very different place than it is today. Very different.
It's a lot more touristy now, right?
Right. It's a lot more touristy, and a lot of people now want to move there, whereas before in the 70s, people didn't want to move there. They wanted to leave. So right before 9/11, it was 2001 in August or so, right before, and I had decided that at the time I was living in San Francisco, and I decided that I was going to take a trip to Peru because I wanted to explore Machu Picchu and I wanted to explore the culture there in the Andes as well as the jungle. And I took a trip to Machu Picchu, and I came back. I was going through Miami airport, and I actually got really sick in Peru, and I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I was running a really high fever. But I had on a winter coat, and I had on a scarf around my face, and I had on big thick sunglasses and a big hat, and I arrived in Miami looking like that. And I got on the line, and there was a long line of people because I had to go through customs, and this was September 10th, 2001. And there I was, all wrapped up in all of this coat and scarf and hat and winter clothes, sick. And I handed my passport to the customs man, and he didn't even ask me to take off my sunglasses. He didn't ask me to take off my scarf on my face. He didn't ask me to take off my jacket. He simply said, "Welcome home, Ms. Gallio." And I slipped right through.
They would never do that now.
No, they would never do that now. So I wondered about that. I thought that was kind of odd, but I didn't really care. I just really wanted to catch my next flight to go back to San Francisco. And when I got back from Peru into San Francisco, of course I was exhausted and I was still kind of sick. So I went to bed. Well, that morning after September 10th, when I came home and I had come back from Peru, at about 6:44 a.m., I bolted up straight out of my bed in San Francisco, and I swore that there had been an earthquake. And I looked at the curtains across from the room, but they weren't shaking, because when you live in California and San Francisco, you kind of look to see if the chandelier is moving or the curtains are moving, and everything was perfectly still in San Francisco. And I thought, but there was just an earthquake. I know there was an earthquake. I know it. I felt it. I felt it. I said, we just had an earthquake. I know it. Apparently there wasn't an earthquake. So I walked outside with my dog, and this time I had a little Maltese named Tino, and it was about 6:50 in the morning or so, and the man across the street came running out of his house to me and said, "Have you seen? Have you seen? They're flying planes into the World Trade Center." And I ran with my little dog upstairs, and I turned on the TV, and there it was. The first plane had probably just hit. And my very first reaction to that was, oh my gosh, I said curse words, George Bush, because I just felt like he was president, and that's what happened. And I just have to backtrack a little bit on this, in that I lived in Manhattan, in downtown Manhattan, for 7 years before living in San Francisco. So I lived in Manhattan. I went to graduate school there. I went to New York University for film, which is downtown, and I worked downtown in the financial center. So I knew the World Trade Center community very well. As a matter of fact, I was there when the first bomb went off, and I knew that community really well as far as catastrophe goes, because the first bomb that went off, it was a catastrophe. I mean, we all had to evacuate out of that area. But
what do you
this
mean
one,
bomb?
Well, a man drove a truck into a parking lot.
Oh, in the 90s.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was part of that. I was part of that scene when that happened. And at the time, I had surgery on my foot, and I was running with crutches trying to, get out of the way because there was so much smoke down there. And I felt like the injured animal in a herd because everybody else was running faster than me and I couldn't keep up. But what wound up happening after that first bombing is that the community came together, and downtown was really never the same. People look you in the eye after the first bombing. People were much more friendly because of that first bombing at the World Trade Center. So seeing it happen on TV while I was in San Francisco, I was in shock and I was angry and I couldn't believe it. It was almost as though I was seeing a movie. It wasn't really happening. And then I didn't even start to think about my family that was in New York City. I didn't, or all of my friends that were in New York City. I didn't even think of that. And when I finally did have the opportunity to think about that, when that came to me, all those people that were there, and some of them I knew, and then the devastation of the towers falling, it overwhelmed me. And I was just absolutely beside myself. It was this place of sort of like believing it but not believing it because you can't believe it. It's so devastating. It was my community and there was nothing I could do. But is it really happening? It is happening, but I can't believe it. But I don't want to believe it. So it was really this very, very difficult moment of just seeing it on TV and not being able to do anything about it, and worrying, of course, for everyone that was there. Well, immediately following that, I think that there was intense and immense shock that such a thing could happen to us. I think that everybody was really just completely devastated and in shock that this could have happened. And what was happening in New York City at the time was that a lot of people had lost loved ones and people were desperate to find them. And there were a lot of signs up with people's pictures. There were family members begging anyone, have you seen this person? Have you seen, this is my brother, this is my uncle, this is my mom. Last seen in the 35th floor or whatever. So it was really, really horrible to see all of the people who were really trying to find people who were in the buildings, that had perished. So it was just terrible. It was so sad. And I think that in the months that followed with the rescues and the cleanup down there, there were a lot of people that came to volunteer. There were hundreds and thousands of people that volunteered, my family being some of them, lining up on the street with food for the firemen and the volunteers. There were tents and camps set up for people who were working all of these long, long hours trying to find victims, sifting through all of the rubble. I had friends who were living in Brooklyn that said that there was this terrible, terrible smell, and all around Lower Manhattan, just a bad smell. And I think that what the nation was dealing with, particularly in San Francisco, was there became, I guess, two camps. One being that, we find these perpetrators and we kill them, and we go to war and we find them for what they did. And then there was another camp that really wanted to explore, particularly in San Francisco, why this happened and not go to war. But then there was also this push to buy and spend, because what happened was after 9/11, businesses started to fall and close because nobody wanted to spend money. People were really scared. People just holed up in their homes and nobody really went out anymore. You could travel for nothing. I mean, you could go get on a plane when the planes were running again, because I think for 5 days there was no travel all over the United States.
Wasn't it like really quiet?
It was very quiet. And I had been planning, I had bought a ticket for like a month later, like in October. And when I went on that plane and I rented a car, it cost me like $7 a day for the rental car, where it costs normally like $50 a day. So things were very cheap if you wanted to travel. And people, the government and communities, well, the government mostly wanted people to buy and spend. They didn't want people to stop spending money. So it was, spend, spend, spend. Everybody spend, spend, spend. But I think that the overall feeling in the country was really of grief and of fear. Very much of fear, because we didn't know what we were up against. We didn't know if somebody was going to come and fly a plane into our own neighborhoods, and there were a lot of people that thought, in the middle of the country someplace, like they were going to fly terrorists in there, and people would have their communities devastated. So there was a lot of fear right after about a month after 9/11 in the country and in communities. And as a whole, I think that we feared, we didn't know what we were up against. You know, I'm one of those people because I got a master's degree in media, particularly film, but I've also studied media in a lot of ways. I always question what I hear on the media often. And I wanted to know more about that. Knowing that it was Osama bin Laden was behind it wasn't really enough for me. It was more about why there are individuals or a group of individuals that did this. What was behind that? What are the policies overseas that would cause them to do this? Um, why is that happening? And that was more of a question that I wanted to know an answer to, in a sense, when I heard that it was Osama bin Laden. It wasn't that I didn't believe it was Osama bin Laden. I was more interested to know why this horrendous act had happened. And I don't think it took too long to kind of figure it out or really dig deep under the surface to take a look at why that was happening. I think that the following months after 9/11, I was very fearful. I was fearful for a lot of things. I was scared to go over bridges. I was scared. I just felt very scared, and so did the rest of the country, because we weren't really sure why it happened, or we weren't sure if it was going to happen again. It seemed as though there was panic always in the air, over the radio or over the TV, that there was anthrax in the mail. There were going to be other attacks.
What is anthrax?
Anthrax was this white powder. It's a poison. It's a white powder that was sent through the mail to certain people. I believe a newscaster received it in the mail. Some random lady received it. And what happens with anthrax is if you open it up and you inhale it, you die. So there was anthrax going through the mail system. So people were panicking about anthrax, thinking it was terrorists. They were panicking about more terrorists coming over and doing these acts, blowing up people on subways. So there was a lot of fear, and I was caught up in that fear during that time. So it changed my life. The immediacy after 9/11, there was this time where there was a lot of fear about what's next, what could happen next to us. But at the same time, what was happening was I had recently made a film, and I was invited to travel around the world to different countries, and I took advantage of that. I went to Europe. I went to all kinds of places, and it helped me to sort of get a sense of other people's, other countries' opinion of America, or what they thought, which, just getting an outside understanding of it, and doing my own research while I was there. But to answer the question about how it changed my life, was that I didn't stay in fear, but I did start to become a little bit more curious about our government, our media, and the way that works. And I became an advocate for peace. I didn't want war to happen. I felt that the war that was thrown on Iraq, the attack on Iraq of shock and awe, was really wrong. I felt terrible for the people of Iraq, particularly the women and the children whose homes and whose communities were being bombed, and they had nothing to do with it at all. I did wind up at some point traveling to Egypt again and again, because the hijackers were Egyptian, and well, some of them were, and I felt like I wanted to know that culture. I wanted to know if that country actually didn't like us. I wanted to know what those people were about. I wanted to connect with those people, because I felt like they were people, and we were people, and we're all connected. So in a lot of ways, I became an advocate for peace and an advocate for truth, an advocate for the human instead of the different religions, an advocate for equality for all people. And I'm still that person, but that's really what 9/11 did for me. It helped me to understand that we don't live in a perfect world, but that in a lot of ways what can help us is not to fight, but maybe to understand and to love and to find our commonalities with each other, as opposed to our differences, and to accept those things. And I think 9/11, in all of its devastation, taught me that.